Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
If you had asked me 5 years ago if I ever thought lending money to my brother could end in anything other than gratitude and closer family ties, I would have laughed in your face and maybe even called you bitter. Matt was my kid brother, the one who used to follow me around in the backyard while I fixed up old bikes and mowed the neighbors' lawns to save for my first junker car. We had history, we had loyalty, we had blood, and I thought that counted for more than contracts or cold, hard cash. I thought wrong, but back then, I believed I was doing the right thing. The thing about second mortgages is they sound harmless when you are just talking about them over a few beers on a Saturday night. Just a little loan against the house I had spent 15 years paying for, the house I had fixed up myself after the divorce gutted me like a fish and left me with nothing but some rusty tools and a broken couch. It was supposed to be temporary, just a bridge to get Matt's dream off the ground. He had this plan, this big damn plan for an outdoor supply store, and he talked about it with the kind of manic light in his eyes that made you want to believe. You wanted to see him win because if he could still dream like that, maybe there was hope for the rest of us. It was my mother, God love her and her guilt trip casseroles, who sealed the deal. She called me one Sunday afternoon when the Cowboys game was just getting good, her voice soft and urgent, like she was reporting a crime. David, honey, he needs you. You know how hard he's trying. Family sticks together, sweetheart. And like a damn fool, I folded faster than a cheap lawn chair. I told myself it was just money. I told myself it was an investment in the family. I told myself that no matter what happened, I would never regret helping my brother chase his dream. The papers were signed 2 weeks later in a dusty little office where the carpet smelled like wet dog and the loan officer kept giving me that sideways look, like he was wondering why a guy my age would risk it all again. I smiled and said it was for family, and he shrugged like he had seen 1,000 brothers before me make the same dumb move. Maybe he had. Maybe I was just the next guy in line waiting to learn a hard truth the slow, painful way. I remember driving home after signing those papers, the windows down and the spring air whipping through the truck cab, feeling strangely light, like maybe something good was finally about to happen. Matt called me that night, voice crackling with excitement, and for a minute, I felt 10 feet tall. "You won't regret this, Dave," he said. "I swear to God, I'm gonna make you proud." And I believed him because back then, I still believed that when people made promises, they meant them. Have you ever done something huge for family and wondered later if it even mattered to them? The first couple of months felt like a honeymoon. Matt was calling me almost daily with updates, sending me pictures of the construction, asking for advice on inventory and shelving and suppliers. We joked about how someday he'd franchise out, maybe call it Matt and Dave's just to be fair, even though it was his face on the flyers and his name above the door. I did not mind staying in the background. That was the deal, right? I would help get him started, and he would take it from there, no hand-holding necessary. But deep down, maybe there was a small, stubborn part of me that hoped, just a little, that when the time came, he would remember who stood beside him when nobody else would. Maybe at the grand opening, he would say a few words, just a nod to the big brother who bet the farm so he could chase a dream. Maybe there would be a plaque somewhere or a thank you speech or just a damn handshake in front of the family. Nothing fancy. Just acknowledgement. The months bled into one another. Matt was busy, always busy, too busy to grab beers or catch a game or even return a call sometimes. I figured that was the price of success, right? Busy meant business was booming, meant the dream was alive. I tried not to take it personally, even when the updates got fewer and fewer, even when the only time I heard from him was when something broke and he needed advice on a cheap fix. Still, I kept telling myself it was fine. He was young. He was under pressure. This was temporary. And besides, what kind of a bitter old bastard gets mad at his brother for working hard? When the invitation came in the mail for the grand opening of Matt's outdoor supply, I held it in my hands for a long time before opening it. The envelope was thick and fancy, like the ones you see at weddings, and the card inside had gold lettering and a little leaf logo. It felt official, big time. I should have felt proud. I should have felt excited. Instead, I felt something sour twist low in my gut, something I tried real hard to shove down with a shot of cheap bourbon before pulling on a clean shirt and heading out the door. The parking lot was packed that day, the big banners fluttering in the breeze, families and old friends shaking hands and clapping Matt on the back like he had just won the lottery. He looked good, tan and fit, standing there with a wireless mic clipped to his belt, and that same manic light still burning in his eyes. He made a speech, of course, about dreams and hard work and the importance of community. He thanked his suppliers, his employees, his high school football coach, and even old man Wilkins from the hardware store who apparently once gave him a free wrench when he was 16. He never mentioned me. Not once. I stood there with my hands stuffed deep in my pockets, smiling so hard my cheeks hurt, pretending it didn't feel like someone had dropped a brick straight into my chest. Pretending it didn't matter. Because maybe it didn't. Maybe helping your brother wasn't about getting a damn parade in your honor. Maybe it was enough just to know you had done the right thing, even if nobody ever clapped you on the back or raised a glass in your name. Or maybe, just maybe, I was finally waking up to the fact that family loyalty sometimes flows only one way, and when the current dries up, you are left standing there, alone and stupid, watching them sail off into the sunset without even a wave goodbye. And I guess that was the moment the first Real crack appeared, even though I buried it under a mountain of excuses and bourbon shots that night, telling myself, it's just a loan, Dave. It's not a sacrifice. You did what you were supposed to do. But man, let me tell you, sometimes a loan feels a hell of a lot like bleeding slowly, and you don't even realize how much you've lost until there's nothing left in the tank. For a little while, it actually felt like things were going the way they were supposed to, like maybe all those Sunday afternoons sanding drywall and talking myself out of cold feet had been worth it after all, because Matt was calling me almost every night, buzzing with excitement and ideas, so much so that I could barely get a word in sometimes without him steamrolling over me with the next big plan. He would talk about the new shelving units he had found on sale, or how he managed to score a sweet deal on tents from a guy he knew out in Chattanooga, or how he wanted to design a corner of the store just for local hikers to leave notes about their favorite trails. And I would sit there in my beat-up recliner, phone pressed to my ear, smiling like a damn fool, because it felt good to hear that kind of hope in someone's voice again. It had been a long time since hope lived anywhere near my zip code, and even if it was borrowed through Matt, even if it was not really mine to claim, it still felt like a warm fire lit in a house that had been cold too damn long. He asked my opinion on everything back then, what color the awnings should be, whether he should offer kayak rentals or stick to straight retail, if it was smarter to hire a marketing firm or just boost posts on Facebook and hope for the best. And every time he asked, I felt a little thread of pride pull tight inside me, stitching up wounds I had carried around for so long I barely noticed them anymore. I started picturing it, the way you do when you let yourself hope too much, me standing there someday, in that store, leaning against the checkout counter while Matt rang up a customer, both of us laughing about the early days. Maybe him tossing me the keys and saying something stupid like could not have done it without you, man, and even though I would brush it off like it was nothing, it would mean everything. The grand opening was circled on my calendar in thick red ink, a little secret reminder that something good was coming, that maybe, for once, I had backed the right horse and all I had to do was be patient and watch him run. But the thing about good things is they have a funny way of showing cracks when you look too close, and once you see that first hairline fracture, it is impossible to unsee it no matter how hard you squint or how much you want to pretend it is not there. The first little tremor came when Matt told me he had hired a couple of his buddies from high school to help him set up the store. Good guys, he said, real go-getters, and I wanted to believe him, but I also knew those guys. I had seen them stumbling out of O'Malley's at 2 in the morning enough times to know go-getter was probably not at the top of their resumes. Still, it was his dream, not mine, and I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood rather than tell him he needed pros, people who would show up sober and on time and treat the business like it was something more than a clubhouse with a cash register. The second crack was a little wider. Matt called one night, way past midnight, slurring his words just a bit, and told me he had decided to upgrade the store's sound system. Gonna give it some real atmosphere, you know? And had dropped $2,000 on speakers that could probably blow the windows out of a concert hall. I asked him, real careful, if that was in the budget we had gone over together. There was a long pause, and then he laughed it off, said something about you gotta spend money to make money, big bro, and changed the subject so fast it made my head spin. After that, the calls got shorter, more rushed, and sometimes he would not call at all for a few days, shooting back a quick text instead with a thumbs-up emoji or some half-assed update that felt like it was meant more to keep me quiet than to keep me informed. There were other little things too, things that would not have seemed like much if you stacked them up on their own, but when you laid them end to end, they painted a picture that was a hell of a lot less bright than the one I had hanging in my head. Matt stopped asking my opinion on things. New charges started popping up on the business account, things like expensive dinners and what looked suspiciously like personal expenses tucked in among the invoices for store supplies. When I asked him about it, he brushed it off with a joke, told me I was acting like an old man counting pennies, that everything was under control and I should just chill. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him more than I had wanted anything in a long, long time, because believing him meant I was not a fool, meant I had not risked everything for nothing, meant I could still trust my own damn judgment. But trust, once it starts to wobble, is like standing on thin ice. You can tell yourself it is safe all you want, but you cannot unhear that first ominous crack beneath your boots. I started lying to myself, little white lies I wrapped up in pretty bows, telling myself that of course Matt was just adjusting to the pressure, that of course he would settle down once the store was running smoothly, that of course he still respected everything I had done for him even if he forgot to say it out loud. After all, who among us has not made a few stupid decisions when we were young and full of dreams and drunk on the heady rush of thinking we finally made it? I told myself to be patient. I told myself to give him time. I told myself that loyalty was not loyalty if it disappeared the second things got messy. But the truth, the ugly, unwelcome truth, was that a part of me had started to wonder if maybe I was not just standing on thin ice. Maybe I was already drowning, and the only reason I had not noticed yet was because I had gotten too good at holding my breath. The day of the grand opening broke bright and crisp, the kind of fall morning where the sun sits low in the sky and the air bites just enough to make you reach for an old jacket you have not thought about since March. And I remember thinking as I pulled into the parking lot that maybe, despite everything, despite the doubts that had been chewing quietly at the back of my mind, today was going to be a good day. One of those rare moments you file away for when the world feels like it is too much to carry. The parking lot was full to bursting, trucks and SUVs packed in tight, and a big vinyl banner hung over the entrance that read Matt's Outdoor Supply, Grand Opening, Welcome, Friends, in big cheerful letters that flapped a little in the chilly breeze. And for a second, I let myself believe again. The way you believe when you are a kid and you think birthday wishes really work if you blow out all the candles in one breath. I found a spot near the back, squeezed between a rusty Dodge and a shiny black Silverado that still had the dealership plates on it, and sat there for a minute with the engine running, staring at the storefront like it was a prize I had somehow helped win. A trophy we both got to share, even if my name was nowhere on the sign. Inside, the place looked damn good. I had to admit it even as something heavy turned over in my gut. Walls lined with neatly stocked shelves, colorful displays of hiking boots and backpacks, racks of fishing rods gleaming under soft lights that made the wood floors glow like something out of a magazine, and the smell of fresh lumber and new merchandise was thick enough to choke on, but somehow comforting too, like the smell of possibility itself. People were milling around, sipping coffee from branded paper cups, laughing and chatting, and everywhere I looked, Matt was there, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, posing for pictures with wide, toothy grins that made him look 10 years younger. Like the kid who used to climb up onto the roof with me to watch 4th of July fireworks long after we were old enough to know better. I stood off to the side, out of the way, feeling half proud and half like an outsider at someone else's party, telling myself it did not matter, telling myself that just being here was enough, that seeing him succeed was its own kind of thanks. Better than any speech or plaque or public nod. Eventually, someone tapped a microphone and the buzz of conversation died down into a hush, the kind that settles in deep when people know something important is about to happen, and Matt stepped up onto a little platform near the registers. Looking sharp in a new jacket and jeans that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment, holding a glass of something golden and sparkling high above his head. He cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and sure, and I felt a ridiculous surge of pride, like maybe I had helped build more than a business, maybe I had helped build a man. He talked about dreams, about hard work, about the long nights and early mornings, about believing in yourself even when the odds are long and the road is uphill, and the crowd ate it up, nodding and clapping and laughing in all the right places like they were at a damn tent revival instead of a glorified sporting goods shop. He thanked his suppliers, his friends, his high school coach who apparently once told him he had the heart of a champion, and old man Wilkins from the hardware store who had loaned him tools back in the day, and he even cracked a joke about his dog, Lucky, being his first loyal customer. I stood there, waiting, heart beating a little too hard, telling myself it was coming, that of course he would mention me, that I just had to be patient, that brothers do not forget brothers, not when it really counts. But the words never came. He never said my name, not even once. The toast ended, the crowd cheered, people started clapping Matt on the back and jostling to shake his hand, and I stood there with my hands shoved deep into the pockets of my old jacket, feeling like I had been slapped so hard my teeth rattled, but still somehow managing to keep a stupid grin pasted on my face like one of those clowns at the county fair. I told myself it did not matter, that he had been nervous, that it was an oversight, that he had not meant anything by it, that I was being petty and small and ridiculous, but no matter how many ways I twisted the story around in my head, the truth sat there like a stone in my gut, heavy and cold and undeniable. It was not just a mistake. It was a warning. A quiet little flare shot up into a clear blue sky, a signal only I could see, telling me that the ground I was standing on was not as solid as I had thought, that the bond one had believed was unbreakable might have already started to rot from the inside out. I shook hands, I smiled, I made small talk with old family friends and distant cousins and people I barely knew but who acted like they had a right to hug me just because they recognized my last name, and through it all, I kept hearing Matt's speech playing over and over again in my head, the way you hear the ringing of a bell long after it has stopped. I watched him from across the room, watched the way he soaked up the praise and the attention, watched the way he beamed under the warm glow of everyone's admiration, and somewhere deep down, a part of me wondered if he even remembered that the only reason he was standing there at all was because someone else had believed in him first, before there were banners and business cards and smiling strangers lining up to buy whatever he was selling. Driving home that night, the highway dark and endless in front of me, I turned the radio up loud enough to drown out my own thoughts. But it did not work, not really, because the thing about betrayal is that it does not need to shout to hurt you. Sometimes all it takes is silence where your name should have been. And even though I told myself again and again that it was just a stupid speech, just a few forgotten words on a busy day, the seed was planted, deep and sure, and no matter how much I wanted to ignore it, I knew in my bones that it was already starting to grow. The days after the grand opening stretched out like slow, sticky taffy, each one pulling a little harder on whatever fragile thread was still connecting me and Matt, and even though I kept telling myself it was just the rush of a new business, the demands of being a first-time owner, the sheer overwhelming busyness of it all, I could not quite silence that ugly little voice in the back of my mind whispering that something had shifted and there was no getting back to the way things had been. At first, I tried reaching out like normal, dropping by the shop on slow Sunday afternoons or shooting a quick text about some new outdoor gear I thought might sell well, but more and more, those texts went unanswered. Those drop-ins were met with a rushed nod or a distracted "Hey, man, can we catch up later?" I'm swamped. And every time he brushed me off, it felt a little less like bad timing and a little more like I was a ghost haunting a place that had already decided to forget me. The first real slap came about 2 weeks after the grand opening, when I spotted a discrepancy on the shop's shared expense account, a couple $1,000 missing. Listed under vague labels like vendor relations and hospitality that did not add up to anything Matt and I had ever discussed, and when I called to ask him about it, his voice went cold in a way that made my skin prickle. All clipped and professional, like he was talking to a creditor instead of his own brother. "Dave, you gotta trust me, man," he said, in that smooth, casual way that made me want to punch something. "I'm handling it. I know what I'm doing. Don't worry about every little thing." Every little thing. That was what he called it now, the second mortgage on my house, the 25 years of busted knuckles and cautious saving that had allowed me to even float him that loan in the first place, the reason he even had a store to call his own. Every little thing. I wanted to push back, to tell him he was out of line, to remind him that without my name on those loan papers, he would still be slinging backpacks out of the back of his beat-up Toyota, but the words stuck in my throat, thick and bitter. Because the last thing I wanted was to turn into that guy, the one who dangled favors over people's heads like a noose. Instead, I laughed it off, told him to keep me posted, and hung up before he could hear whatever was about to crack loose in my voice, the kind of raw anger that feels too much like heartbreak when you say it out loud. After that, it only got worse. Matt started treating me less like a brother and more like a damn landlord, sending me terse emails about minor repairs he needed permission to make, asking about property taxes, acting like I was just another line item on his endless to-do list instead of the reason he had a to-do list at all. The funny thing about being treated like a landlord is that it makes you start thinking like one, and there were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning its lazy circles above my bed, wondering how much commercial rent in that part of town was going for these days, wondering how much Matt would squirm if I decided to play this like a business arrangement instead of a family favor. But every time I started seriously thinking about pulling that thread, I would remember the way he used to follow me around when we were kids, wide-eyed and grinning, trying to copy every stupid thing I did. And I would shove those ugly thoughts down where they could not poison me, telling myself that family meant more than money, even when it hurt. Then the Thanksgiving invitation showed up, tucked inside a plain white envelope that looked suspiciously like an afterthought. Like someone had grabbed it off the clearance rack at the drugstore on the way home from work and scribbled our names on it without thinking too hard about it. Inside, there was a note in Matt's lazy handwriting, saying he was hosting Thanksgiving this year at the shop, setting up a big potluck spread in the back room since the new house he and his girlfriend were buying was not move-in ready yet, and that he hoped I could make it. No apology for the way things had been going, no mention of how long it had been since we had actually sat down like brothers instead of adversaries, no acknowledgement of the cold, careful distance that had bloomed between us like a slow-moving cancer. Just a simple, almost casual hope you can make it. I sat there at the kitchen table for a long time, turning the envelope over and over in my hands, trying to figure out if going was the right thing or the stupid thing, because honestly, it felt like walking straight into a buzzsaw wearing nothing but a grin. Part of me wanted to tear it up and toss it in the trash, pour a whiskey, and spend Thanksgiving watching football alone with the only family member who had never let me down, my old dog, Scout, and part of me felt like if I did not go, if I did not at least try to patch this up, I would be letting that little kid version of Matt down, the one who still thought I hung the moon. I kept picturing it, though, walking into that store, seeing the way Matt would probably light up at everyone else's arrival but greet me with that tight, distracted smile he saved for things he would rather not deal with. Watching him soak up the praise from our cousins and uncles and neighbors while pretending he had built it all himself. No help needed, no debts owed. I kept hearing his voice in my head, casual and cutting all at once. It's my store, bro, chill. And damn it if that did not sting more than any open insult would have, because it told me everything I needed to know about where I stood now, not as a partner, not even as a brother, but as a relic from a part of his life he was trying to outrun. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about family, about gratitude, about remembering where you came from. And somehow it felt like Matt had taken all those things and twisted them into a party where he could play the self-made man while the people who actually helped him get there stood in the back and clapped on cue. Still, after a long night of pacing the living room and arguing with myself like a crazy person, I wrote a polite little RSVP and dropped it in the mail, because somewhere under all the anger and disappointment and bruised pride, I still wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was enough brother left in him to make it all worth it. Or maybe I just needed to see it fall apart with my own eyes before I could finally, truly, let it go. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the kind of heavy, gray sky that promised either rain or snow if you waited long enough, and as I pulled on my jacket and loaded a store-bought pumpkin pie into the passenger seat of my truck, I had the uneasy feeling that the weather was not the only thing hanging heavy in the air that day. The roads were mostly empty, the occasional gust of wind sending dried leaves skittering across the asphalt like tiny brown ghosts, and the whole drive over to Matt's store, I found myself gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, knuckles whitening as I tried to shove down the knot of anxiety building in my chest. There was something about walking into a place you helped build with your own blood and sweat, knowing deep down that the person inside might not even acknowledge it, that made you feel smaller than you ever thought possible. But I told myself, over and over again, that it was Thanksgiving, a day meant for gratitude and forgiveness, not for nursing old wounds or picking new fights. The store looked different with the holiday decorations strung up, a few sad-looking garlands twisted around the door frames, a crooked inflatable turkey listing to one side near the entrance, folding tables covered with plastic tablecloths bearing cartoon pilgrims and autumn leaves, and even though it was not much, I could tell Matt had tried to make it feel festive in that slapdash, bachelor sort of way that made me smile despite myself. Inside, the air was thick with the smells of turkey and gravy and that sweet, spicy tang of pumpkin pie, and for one foolish, hopeful second, it almost felt like home, like maybe we could sit down together, break bread, and remember that once upon a time, before money and pride and ambition got in the way, we had been family first and everything else second. Matt spotted me from across the room and waved, a beer already in one hand and a loud, easy laugh spilling out of him as he joked with a group of his friends near the drink table, and even though he made his way over to clap me on the back and thank me for coming, there was a hurried, distracted quality to the whole thing, like he was checking me off a list rather than genuinely glad to see me. I set the pie down with the others, grabbed a beer from the cooler, and did my best to settle into the crowd, making small talk with distant cousins and family friends I had not seen since my father's funeral years ago, trying to ignore the gnawing sense that I was a guest at a party where everyone else had gotten their invitations months ago, and I had only been added at the last minute out of obligation. The tables were crammed into the back half of the store, folding chairs packed shoulder to shoulder, and once everyone had heaped their plates with turkey and mashed potatoes and green bean casserole, Matt clinked his glass with a fork and stood up, swaying slightly as he waited for the chatter to die down. He looked good, I had to admit it, the kind of confident, self-assured good that comes from feeling like you have finally arrived at the place you always told yourself you would, and as he cleared his throat and raised his glass, the room went quiet, all eyes on him. Waiting. He started by thanking everyone for coming, throwing in a few jokes about how we might not have fancy china or matching chairs, but we got plenty of food and booze, and that's what really counts, and the crowd chuckled obligingly, raising their glasses in agreement. Then he shifted gears, his voice taking on that earnest, slightly preachy tone he always got after a few drinks, the one that made him sound like he was giving a halftime locker room speech instead of a Thanksgiving toast. He talked about hard work, about believing in yourself even when nobody else does, about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and never asking for a handout, about staying true to your dreams even when the odds are stacked against you, and with every word, I felt something inside me tighten, a slow, deliberate twisting like a knife in a wound that had barely started to scab over. He thanked his friends for sticking by him, his mentors for their advice, his girlfriend for her support, even the local community for believing in a scrappy kid with a dream, and the crowd ate it up, nodding and smiling and clinking their glasses in agreement. Swept up in the warm, easy glow of a story that sounded so good if you did not know any better. But not once, did he mention me. Not my help, not the loan, not the risk I had taken, not the years of work it had taken me to get to a place where I could even afford to float him that lifeline when nobody else would. It was like I had been scrubbed out of the story completely, a footnote erased from the bottom of a page nobody would ever read. The applause that followed was loud and heartfelt, forks tapping plates, glasses clinking, chairs scraping as people stood to raise their drinks higher, and I sat there frozen, beer untouched in my hand, my face carefully blank as I clapped along with everyone else, pretending that I did not feel like I had just been gutted and left smiling at the person who held the knife. I told myself, again, that it was fine, that it did not matter, that real help does not need recognition, that family means doing what needs to be done without expecting a medal for it, but deep down, some cold, hard part of me knew that this was not just forgetfulness or nerves or a slip of the tongue. This was a choice. A deliberate, cutting choice to rewrite the story in a way that made Matt the lone hero, the self-made man who needed nobody and owed nothing, not even a nod to the brother who had bet the farm on his dreams. Dinner went on around me, loud and warm and chaotic, plates passed and stories told, but I felt like I was floating outside of it all, a ghost at the feast, clapping and laughing and smiling at the right moments even as something deep inside me cracked in two. Later, as the night wound down and people bundled into coats and hugged goodbyes at the door, Matt clapped me on the back again, his breath hot with whiskey, and said something about getting together sometime soon, and I smiled and nodded and said I would love that, knowing full well it would never happen. Driving home through the dark, empty streets, the cold seeping into the cab of the truck no matter how high I cranked the heat, I kept replaying that toast in my mind. The easy way, he had cut me out without even blinking, and for the first time in a long, long while. I started to wonder if maybe the brother I had sacrificed so much for had never really been there at all. Maybe I had been clinging to a ghost this whole time, chasing the memory of a bond that had died long before the ink dried on that loan paperwork, and all that was left now was a hollow shell. Smiling and shaking hands and telling pretty stories about bootstraps and independence to a crowd too busy clapping to notice the man he had trampled on his way to the top. The thing about betrayal is that it rarely happens all at once, crashing down in some big dramatic explosion the way it does in the movies. Instead, it drips slowly into you, one careless word, one forgotten thank you, one deliberate omission at a time. Until you are standing there, smiling with everyone else, while something inside you quietly rots away. I had spent the better part of Thanksgiving dinner replaying Matt's toast in my mind like a broken record, trying to convince myself that it did not matter, that I was being childish. That holding grudges on a day meant for gratitude was the surest way to end up bitter and alone, but by the time dessert hit the table, something inside me had hardened in a way I did not recognize. I do not know when exactly I made the decision, whether it was during the awkward silence after Matt's speech, or when I caught the quick, almost smug glance he threw across the table at one of his buddies. The look of a man proud of how far he had come with no mention of the people he had stepped over to get there, but by the time I reached into my coat pocket and felt the crisp edge of the manila folder I had tucked there that morning, I knew there was no turning back. It had been a precaution at first, just something I had grabbed out of the filing cabinet almost without thinking. Maybe some part of me had known deep down that today would be the day everything changed. Or maybe I had just gotten tired of pretending the cracks in the foundation were not there, widening a little more every time Matt chose pride over family. The noise around the table was cheerful and chaotic, kids shrieking over spilled cranberry sauce, adults laughing too loudly at old jokes they had all heard 100 times before, and for a second, I hesitated, wondering if I was about to become the villain in a story I had spent my whole life trying to write myself out of. But then I looked across the table at Matt, his arms slung casually around his girlfriend's chair, grinning that easy, empty grin he had perfected over the past few months. And I remembered the look in his eyes when he had stood up and told the world he had done it all on his own, and the hesitation evaporated like smoke on the wind. I stood up slowly, ignoring the curious glances from around the table, and reached into my coat, pulling out the folder with steady hands that belied the storm raging inside me. The room quieted a little, the way it always does when someone stands without warning, that ripple of attention shifting as conversations trailed off and heads turned in my direction, and for a moment I just stood there, the folder heavy in my hand, the weight of 1,000 unspoken words pressing down on my shoulders. Then I smiled, a slow, careful smile that felt foreign on my face, and set the folder down in the center of the table with a soft thud that somehow sounded louder than the clatter of forks and glasses. "Matt," I said, my voice calm and even, almost conversational, "since you're all about bootstraps and independence these days, maybe we should talk about rent starting in January." There was a beat of pure, stunned silence, the kind that seems to stretch out forever, and then the sound of metal forks clattering against plates as hands froze mid-bite and heads whipped around in shock. I could see the confusion flicker across Matt's face first, a quick, bewildered frown, like maybe he thought I was joking, some awkward attempt at humor that had missed its mark. But as he reached for the folder and flipped it open, skimming the neat legal lines with dawning horror, the color drained from his face so fast it was almost comical. The deed was there, plain and irrefutable, the property title bearing my name, not his, the black and white proof that no matter how much he puffed out his chest and played the self-made man, the ground he stood on belonged to someone else entirely. Someone he had forgotten. Someone he had taken for granted. Someone who had finally had enough. You could have heard a pin drop in that room, the tension so thick it wrapped around your throat and squeezed until breathing felt like work, and for a long, endless moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even dared to shift in their seat. Matt's mouth opened and closed a few times, fish-like, as he struggled to find words, but whatever he was trying to say got lost somewhere between pride and panic, and in the end, he just sat there staring at me like he had never seen me before in his life. I stayed standing, not because I wanted the attention, hell, I would have given anything to be anywhere else right then, but because I needed him to see it, needed him to understand that this was not a joke, not a warning, not a threat. It was a reckoning. The rest of the family shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between us like spectators at a prize fight they had not paid to see but were too horrified to look away from, and somewhere down the table, someone dropped a wine glass, the sharp crack of it hitting the floor, making half the room jump. Still, nobody said a word. Finally, Matt found his voice, thin and strained and ugly with disbelief. "You're kidding," he said, half laughing, half pleading, like maybe if he said it enough times, the deed would vanish from the table and everything would snap back to the way it was before. I just shook my head slowly, the smile never leaving my face, though it felt brittle enough to shatter if anyone breathed too hard. "No, little brother," I said, and if my voice cracked a little on the word brother, nobody called me on it. "Starting January 1st, market rates apply." After all, I added, my gaze steady and unblinking as his world tilted under him, "It's all about independence, right?" There was another long, terrible silence, the kind that seems to soak into your bones and leave you colder than any winter wind could, and then people started gathering their things in a hurry, muttering awkward goodbyes, shuffling toward the door without meeting my eyes, as if they were afraid that whatever had shattered between me and Matt might somehow splinter and cut them too. Matt just sat there, shoulders hunched, staring down at the deed like it was written in a language he could not understand, and I turned and walked out without another word, the door swinging closed behind me with a soft, final click that sounded louder than any slam. Outside, the air was sharp and clean, the stars just starting to pierce through the heavy clouds, and as I climbed into my truck and pulled out of the parking lot without looking back, I realized that, for the first time in a long time, I did not feel like I was drowning anymore. I felt free. Broken maybe, bruised and battered and a little bit hollow, but free in a way that only comes when you finally stop waiting for someone to be the person they promised they were and start being the person you need to be for yourself. It is a funny thing, how fast everything can go to hell after you pull one single thread, how the whole carefully constructed fabric of family gatherings, polite smiles, and unsaid resentments can unravel in mere seconds once you show people something they do not want to see. I barely made it halfway across the parking lot before the shouting started behind me, loud enough to echo off the storefront windows and bounce back across the cracked asphalt like a bad memory you can never quite outrun. And I paused with one hand on the door handle of my truck, listening to the chaos spill out into the cold night air. It was Matt's voice at first, sharp and panicked, calling after me with a desperation that might have meant something if it had come a year earlier. Before the lies and the erasures and the bullshit speeches about bootstraps and hard work that somehow managed to leave me out of the story entirely. Then it was my mother's voice, brittle with the kind of outrage only a mother can muster, shrill and cutting as she demanded to know what the hell had just happened, how I could embarrass my own brother like that on Thanksgiving of all days. Like I had just stood up and slapped him across the face for no good reason. I heard my Uncle Rick's gruff rumble next, low and angry, something about how maybe Matt had needed a good dose of reality, how maybe he had been riding too high for too long without remembering who gave him the ladder to climb in the first place. And then it was a mess of overlapping voices, shouting over each other, trying to stake their claims on the moral high ground like buzzards fighting over a fresh carcass. I stood there for a long moment, the cold seeping through the thin soles of my boots, feeling nothing and everything all at once, and then I climbed into the truck and slammed the door shut harder than I needed to, the solid thunk of it cutting off the noise like a guillotine blade. The engine rumbled to life beneath me, steady and familiar, and for a second I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel and staring through the windshield at nothing, the events of the night replaying behind my eyes like a movie I never wanted to see again. Part of me wanted to go back in there, to defend myself, to tell them all the things I had swallowed down over the past year, the sleepless nights, the late payments, the gnawing guilt every time I looked at the mortgage statement and wondered if I had just destroyed the only real security I had ever managed to build for myself, but I knew better. I knew that no matter what I said, no matter how many receipts I laid out, there were some people who would always see me as the villain now, the man who ruined Thanksgiving because he could not keep his pride tucked neatly away under the dinner table where it belonged. So I put the truck in drive and rolled slowly out of the parking lot, my tires crunching over gravel and broken dreams, and turned onto the main road without looking back. The streets were nearly empty. Most of the town holed up in their warm houses, bellies full of turkey and mashed potatoes, laughter and television lights spilling through the windows like snapshots from a life I had somehow stepped outside of without realizing it. I drove aimlessly for a while, no destination in mind, the radio playing low and crackly in the background, some sad country song about losing things you never thought you would, and even though I hated country music with a quiet, burning passion, I let it play because somehow it fit. The more miles I put between myself and that damn storefront, the more the adrenaline drained out of me, leaving behind a hollow, aching emptiness that no amount of self-righteous anger could fill, and somewhere along a dark stretch of two-lane highway, I finally let myself ask the question I had been trying to outrun all night. Had I become the bad guy? Had I crossed some invisible line between standing up for myself and tearing someone else down, between demanding respect and swinging a wrecking ball through what little family ties I still had left? It was easy, in the heat of the moment, to tell myself that Matt had deserved it, that he had made his choices, that I had merely forced him to look at the consequences he had spent so long trying to ignore, but sitting there alone in the cab of my truck. The heater rattling uselessly against the creeping cold, it did not feel like victory. It felt like loss. Real, bone-deep loss, the kind that does not fade with time or distance, the kind that sits inside you like a splinter you can never quite dig out, festering quietly beneath every conversation, every holiday, every polite, strained smile at future family gatherings where everyone pretends nothing ever happened. I thought about Matt's face when he opened that folder, the way his mouth had fallen open in shock, the way he had looked at me not with anger or even hatred, but with the raw, bewildered hurt of someone who genuinely could not believe I had finally said no after a lifetime of saying yes, and it twisted something inside me that I did not have a name for. Maybe he really had believed his own story, the one where he pulled himself up by sheer willpower and grit, where nobody had ever lifted him when he stumbled or caught him when he fell. Maybe, in his mind, I was just another obstacle he had overcome, another doubter he had proved wrong by succeeding on his own terms, and maybe that was easier for him to live with than admitting he had needed help in the first place. I do not know. Maybe I will never know. All I know is that somewhere between the signing of that loan and the dropping of that folder onto the Thanksgiving table, I had lost something I could never quite name, and no amount of justifications or second-guessing would bring it back. I drove until the gas gauge dipped toward empty, then pulled into an old roadside diner, its neon sign buzzing weakly against the darkness, and sat there in the parking lot for a long time, engine idling, wondering if there was a way to fix what had been broken or if the only thing left to do was figure out how to live with the wreckage. Maybe that is the real aftermath no one tells you about, not the shouting matches or the slammed doors or the splintered loyalties, but the quiet, endless wondering if you did the right thing, and the even quieter fear that maybe, just maybe, you didn't. A week later, the house was quieter than it had any right to be, the kind of heavy, dragging silence that settles into the walls when nobody has come through the door in days, and I found myself sitting at the kitchen table long after the coffee had gone cold, staring out the window at the bare trees swaying against a dull gray sky that looked more like February than November. The remains of Thanksgiving were still shoved into the fridge like relics from a life that had already moved on without me, half a pie sagging sadly under plastic wrap, a container of stuffing that had gone dry around the edges. And I kept telling myself to just throw it all out, to clear the damn fridge and clear my damn head, but somehow I could not make myself do it. The table was cluttered with unopened mail and bills I did not feel like opening, old coffee mugs leaving rings on the wood, and in the middle of it all sat my phone, buzzing once, twice. A sharp little vibration against the mess that startled me more than it should have after so many days of nothing. For a second, my heart kicked into high gear, stupid and hopeful, some part of me thinking maybe it would be Matt, maybe a text, maybe an apology, maybe a sign that he had thought about it, about me, about everything that had cracked and crumbled that night in front of everyone we loved. But when I picked it up, it was just a notification from social media, that cheap little drug we all keep hooked into our veins no matter how much it burns. Matt's Outdoor Supply had posted an update, the bright, polished photo taking up the whole screen, Matt standing in front of a new building, bigger, shinier, flanked by a couple of new employees in matching branded jackets. The caption bubbling with forced enthusiasm about how they were moving up to a bigger and better location thanks to the unwavering support of this amazing community. I stared at the photo for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen, not scrolling, not liking, not commenting, just absorbing the way he stood there, beaming like a man who had never known struggle. Like a man who had built it all with nothing but guts and grit and the steady, endless belief that he could. There was no mention of the last location, no note of thanks to whoever had floated him the loan that got him through those first brutal months, no acknowledgement of the history behind the smile. Just forward momentum, all shiny and slick, the past scraped clean and polished over like a scratch on a new car. For a long minute, I did not feel much of anything. Not anger, not sadness, just a dull, buzzing emptiness, like the silence that comes after a gunshot, the kind that leaves your ears ringing even when there is nothing left to hear. I set the phone down carefully, like it might explode if I handled it wrong, and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling and letting the weight of everything settle into my bones. Was it worth it? The question rolled around in my head, bumping into the corners like a marble in a shoebox, and for the life of me, I could not find an answer that felt right. Part of me wanted to believe that standing up for myself, drawing that hard, ugly line, was necessary, that there comes a point when swallowing pride stops being noble and starts being pathetic. When loving someone means holding them accountable even if it costs you everything else. Another part of me, the part that remembered backyard baseball games and late-night talks under the stars, and the way Matt used to look at me like I could fix anything if I just tried hard enough, whispered that maybe family meant eating the bitter pie sometimes. That maybe real loyalty was not about keeping score or cashing receipts, but about standing quietly in the background, invisible and necessary and unthanked. Maybe that was the real deal you made with family, that you gave without expecting, that you forgave without demanding, that you let them believe their own myths because sometimes people needed their stories more than they needed the truth. Maybe by pulling that deed out in front of everyone, I had not just forced Matt to face the cost of his pride. Maybe I had forced all of us to face how fragile the good things were, how easily they shattered when you stopped pretending they were made of something stronger than glass. I thought about my mother's face that night, twisted with a hurt I had not seen since my father left, and about the way my cousins had avoided my eyes as they gathered their coats and mumbled their goodbyes, and about the way Matt had just sat there, stunned and small, like a man who had been caught naked in front of a crowd he thought adored him. And I thought about myself, driving home alone through empty streets, a folder full of bitter proof sitting on the passenger seat like a silent witness to the fact that sometimes, no matter how right you are, you still lose. The heater kicked on with a low, rattling groan, stirring the stale air, and I got up slowly, joints popping, and poured the cold coffee down the sink, watching it swirl away into nothing. I pulled the leftovers out of the fridge one by one, dumping them into the trash without ceremony, the smell of old turkey and spoiled gravy filling the kitchen in a way that made my stomach twist. I wiped down the table, threw out the junk mail, washed the mugs, trying to scrub away the ghosts of a holiday that had left more scars than smiles. The phone buzzed again, another cheerful notification, another reminder that the world keeps moving even when you are standing still, and this time I ignored it, shoving the device into a drawer and slamming it shut with more force than necessary. I stood there for a long time, hands braced on the edge of the sink, staring out at the gray afternoon, wondering if somewhere, Matt was standing in his new store, laughing with his new employees, raising a toast to hard work and fresh starts and everything he had built with his own two hands. Wondering if he ever thought about me at all. Maybe he did. Maybe he did not. Maybe it did not matter anymore. Maybe that was the price of finally letting go, accepting that some debts are never repaid, that some things never come, that some endings are quieter and colder than you ever imagined they could be. Was it worth it? I still did not know. Maybe I would never know. Maybe some questions were not meant to have answers, just the endless, aching echo of asking them into the dark, hoping one day, when it hurt a little less, you would stop needing to hear anything back.